We find ourselves on Tisha B'Av one more time, hopefully the last Tisha B'Av. And I'd like to continue an idea that I started talking about last year. And it's a topic that may on the surface seem strange to talk about on Tisha B'Av. It's about simcha, about joy, about happiness. This is a topic that... This is a topic that's close to my heart, both as a Rav, as someone who started and is running a major Kiruv organization here in Queens, Emet Outreach, as well as my background as a therapist. Simcha is a topic that I study a lot and is something that's close to my heart, you could say. We are now mourning the Beit HaMikdash, and what is it that when we mourn? What does it mean that we're mourning something? Rav Shimshon Pincus speaks out. He says that when you mourn, we're really mourning the disconnection that we now have with that neshama. We now, when a person mourns a loved one that passes away, we're mourning the disconnection that we now have with that soul. We know the soul continues to live on, but we are now disconnected from that soul. And when we mourn the Beit HaMikdash, we mourn the disconnection that each and every one of us have from the Shekhinah, from the Kedusha, from the holiness that's outside of us and inside of us. The Beit HaMikdash was a connector that connected each and every one of us to our source. The purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was not that Hashem should dwell in the Beit HaMikdash, as the Pasuk so beautifully says, V'asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Build for me a Beit HaMikdash and I will dwell inside of you. The purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was that God should dwell inside of us. But without that Beit HaMikdash, without that connection, we are disconnected. The Pasuk in Yirmiyah refers to Yerushalayim as a woman who is a zonah. A zonah is a prostitute. On the surface, she looks like she's connected to so many people, but in reality, she's disconnected from everything, from herself and from everything. All chet, all sin, at the core is disconnection. We know Tisha B'Av, this day of Tisha B'Av, which is a day of mourning throughout the generations, goes back to the Meraglim, when the spies came back, and they cried because of a lack of faith, or whatever it was that they were crying about. And Hashem said, you cried for nothing. For generations you will cry. Ultimately, what is that about? It's not a punishment. It's a consequence for a disconnection. All averot, bin adam l'makom, between man and God, bin adam l'chavero, between man and fellow man, have at their core disconnection. If I really value who you are and the neshama that you have, and the infinite value that Hashem put, the Tzelem Elokim, the image of God that's inside of you, and inside of me, and inside of each and every one of us, do I feel competition from you? Do I need to put you down? Do I need to say Lashon Hara? Am I jealous? It's crazy to be jealous. It's crazy to speak Lashon Hara. But the problem is we're disconnected. We're disconnected from the source. We're disconnected to what our true identity is, our true value. We're disconnected to what your true value is. And because of that disconnection, we have chet, we have sin. The word mitzvah, many commentaries say, come from the word tzavta. A tzavta is a connector. It connects us to something beyond ourselves. In Parshas Kisavo, one of the two places in the Torah that talks about the curses, the terrible tragedies that will befall the Jewish people if we don't follow the Torah mitzvot. There's two very interesting verses in that parsha that seem to talk about the same word. Right in the beginning of that parsha, we have the mitzvah bikurim, the first fruits. When you lived in the time of the temple, almost everybody was farmers. The first fruits was an exciting event that you prepared, and you took this first fruits, and what would you say when you brought those fruits to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim? The pasuk says, "V'samachta b'chol hatov," and I am happy with all the good that Hashem gave to me. And then later in that parsha, in the same chapter, we have the curses and the tragedies that will happen to the Jewish people if we don't follow the Torah mitzvot. And right in the middle of the curses, there's a verse that does not seem to fit in. And the verse says, that the reason all these bad things happen is because you did not serve Hashem b'simcha, with happiness, b'tov levav, with a full heart, meirov kol, when things were good. And it's very strange in the middle of this tragedy to tell me the reason why we have the Churban, why we have all these problems. And it's interesting that the reason is because of the lack of simcha, lack of joy. One of the Gaonim actually says that from here is a source that from the Torah you have a mitzvah d'oraita to be b'simcha, to do mitzvot with happiness and to be happy. What it seems that the Torah is telling us is not what we would have thought. I think we would have thought, why did people sin? Because of ta'ava, because of temptation, because of desire. Our Yetzer Hara got the better of us, and therefore we sinned. What does the Torah tell us? It says no. The reason we sinned is because we didn't serve Hashem b'simcha when things were good. And what it seems is, we're going to talk about this in the next few moments, is that when a person doesn't do mitzvot b'simcha, they're not connected to the mitzvah in a way that they should be, or the way they could be. And then the Yetzer Hara, then the temptation, then the ta'ava, the desires and for doing wrong things have a heyday, have a party on us. But if we're properly connected to the mitzvot, if we're doing mitzvot in a true connection, we have the upper hand. It seems that the key to doing mitzvot is not just to do mitzvot, not just to do them better, but to do them with more simcha. In the same parsha, we have a pasuk, it's a very interesting pasuk, and it says, Hashem says to us, you treated me bikeri, you treated me with rot, without feeling, without connection. I will treat you with rot. And you'll be affected by, according to many of the commentaries, you'll be affected by the natural consequence of events, not the protection that I normally would give you. The opposite of doing a mitzvah b'simcha is keri, is chance. This year, Tisha B'Av was pushed off because of Shabbat. It's called Nidcha. And it has different halachot because of the fact that it's pushed off because of Shabbat. I think in the fact that Tisha B'Av was pushed off because of Shabbat, we can learn something that can help bring this idea home. Shabbat, why is Tisha B'Av pushed off because of Shabbat? And similarly, why when someone is in mourning for a loved one, do we say that the mourning stops because of Shabbat? Just a few years ago, we had a very close Emet student who unfortunately passed away in a car accident on Friday morning. And they didn't even have a chance to do kfurah, to do burial. And the whole family came out, I remember it like it was today, to Rabbi Delman's house on Shabbat. And they were enjoying Shabbat and obviously very affected by what happened to their relative. But the mourning stopped because of Shabbat. What does that mean? Are we in denial? The person passed away. The person wasn't even buried. How can we not be in mourning? And the answer, I believe, is that what Shabbat teaches us, Shabbos, is the ultimate connector. A connector to something above mourning. As we said before, mourning, death, is a temporary state. It's not really real because the soul lives on. It's a disconnection between the body and the soul. And Shabbat, all throughout the week, we're in basically that also somewhat of a disconnection between our body and our soul. Come Shabbat, and we are connected. Shabbat, as the commentaries refer to it, is Me'ein Olam Haba, taste of the world to come. Shimshon Pincus and others, they point out, it's not just a taste of the world to come. Shabbat is the world to come in this world. On Shabbat, you have an opportunity to connect to the world to come. What is the world to come called? Yom Shekulo Shabbat. A day that's all Shabbat. What do we do on Shabbat? We're supposed to be connected to our neshamot. We're supposed to be connected to a higher level. Realizing that our success doesn't come from our mundane actions, but really comes from something higher. If I really realize that, am I in competition with another person? No, I'm not. And if we really tap into the power of Shabbat, then there is no mourning. There is no death. And that's why Shabbat is nidche Tisha B'Av. That's why Shabbat overcomes Tisha B'Av. Shabbat overcomes mourning for Avelot. Because on Shabbat we're able to tap into a place where there is no mourning, there is no death. It's interesting that if you look at the prayers of Shabbat, you see again and again the word simcha. Yismechu b'malchuscha. So many times it refers to the simcha and the oneg of Shabbat. The Orchos Tzadikim, one of the great writers of Musar, he wrote, like many hundreds of years ago, that if you do a mitzvah b'simcha, with joy, you have 1,000 times the reward than if you do it without joy. The Arizal HaKadosh, who just had his yortzeit last week, he says that the way I became who I was not because I did mitzvot better than the next person, but I did it with more simcha. I saw a beautiful story about the Panovich Rav. The great Panovich Rav lost so much in the Holocaust, came to Israel after the war, and he founded yeshivos and schools, a tremendous visionary in Israel in the early 1950s, right after the war. And he was laying the ground, the stone for the first major yeshiva he was going to build in Bnei Brak. And as he stopped to lay this first stone, he told the crowd in attendance, and he said, "I want to tell you that this stone is in dedication to my mother." They hadn't heard the story, so they were listening very carefully. And he says, many years ago, when I was a small child, it seems the father wasn't around, and they lived in Russia, very poor and very cold. And him and his, I believe, 3 or 4 siblings, brothers, a few were older than him, were all studying in a yeshiva. And he was a small child at the time, I think something like about 10 years old. And it was an extremely cold winter day, and it was snowing nonstop. And the family only had 1 pair of shoes and 1 coat. And they had a debate. And the mother said, "What should we do? Who should take the coat and the shoes to yeshiva the next day?" And each son said, "It should be me. It should be me." And each one was trying to say why they should be the one to learn Torah. And the mother was so moved by this that she woke up the next morning, put on the shoes, put on the coat, put a blanket around her sons, and carried each boy to the yeshiva, like a mile away, and back in the snow. Now that's not the most important part of the story, though. As she did it, she sang like it's Simchat Torah. And that's what left the impact on the Panovich Rav. The fact that she sacrificed for Torah, it's important. The fact that she did it, b'simcha, left such a big mark on him that he built yeshivot 50 years later. Many of the students of Emet Arich are from the Sephardic community. I happen to be Ashkenazi. I like to call myself Ashkenazi with a Sephardi neshama. I had the opportunity to go to many brisim and simchot, Sephardic simchot. And my father often points out, when we go to a simcha together, and I see it as well, that when I'm at a bris, a Sephardic bris, I feel the connection to the mitzvah that I don't always feel at Ashkenazi bris. And I'm not here to knock anyone, God forbid. There's strengths to every community. Every community has its own strengths. But there's a certain connection, simcha, at a Sephardic bris that I feel that's very unique. And you feel that there's an excitement here. There's a band playing. Why is a band playing? Because there's a new Jew coming to the Jewish people. And you feel that connection that sometimes I don't always feel in other places. How do we go about bringing simcha into our lives and living a life of simcha. So last year I spoke about the idea of gratitude and how gratitude and simcha are two sides of the same coin. And one of the ways to be b'simcha is to be grateful. And almost to the point that you cannot be grateful and not be b'simcha, and you can't be b'simcha if you're not grateful. But I'd like to talk about a different nukudah, a different point of how a person can be b'simcha. And what I would like to suggest is that we have an opportunity to infuse our life with simcha, with joy. And sometimes it feels like a catch-22. It feels like if I'm not b'simcha, then I'm not connected. If I'm not connected, then how do I get to a point where I should be connected? How do you make that transition? And when, in addition to being a Rav, I also am a marriage counselor. And sometimes I have the opportunity to work with couples. And very often couples face the same struggle. They want to be close to each other, but they feel disconnection. When there's disconnection, it's hard to feel simcha, it's hard to feel joy in what you're doing. If you don't feel joy in what you're doing, then you don't feel connected. And it spirals in a direction that doesn't go where we want it to go. So how do we go and put simcha into our life? How do we do what the Arizal said, that we live a life of simcha, of doing mitzvot with simcha? I would like to suggest that Shabbat may be the solution, or a part of the solution. When we keep Shabbat, like I said before, we're entering this different state when we keep Shabbat. But how much simcha is there in our Shabbat? I would like to suggest that we can add more simcha to our Shabbos, and through doing so, be more connected to ourselves, to Hashem, to our essence, to our families, and therefore ultimately be more connected to mitzvot and use that as a spiral, as a connector to reconnect in every aspect of our ruchnius, of our spirituality. Rav Moshe Feinstein so famously spoke about the people who he saw on the Lower East Side of Manhattan who sacrificed so much for Torah and mitzvot. They used to lose their job every Friday, every Shabbat, and have to find a new job on Monday. And yet their children and grandchildren didn't continue the Torah afterwards, many of them. And it bothered Rav Moshe Feinstein so much. And he came to the conclusion that the problem was that they would say, it's hard to be a Jew. It's schwer zu sein Yid. It's hard to be a Jew. And their children would say, Daddy, I have so much respect for you, but why do I need to continue this? Why do I need these problems? I would like to suggest that if we could put more simcha into our Shabbat, ultimately we are going to do the greatest gift for ourselves, for our children, and for the future. Because we are showing our children how valuable Shabbat, how connected we are to mitzvot. And through doing so, our children want to continue this afterwards. Probably the greatest guarantee that a person's great-grandchildren will be Shomer Torah mitzvot is if we have a Shabbat that's inspired, if we have mitzvot that are full of inspiration. We're living in a society today of disconnection. Whether it's the smartphones that are the cause of the problem or the result of the problem, we're living in a society that's very, very disconnected. Suicide rate in America in the last 20 years is up over 33% across the entire country. People are disconnected. Addiction is up. How do we create connection? How do we create true connection? And I would suggest that we create connection, we go to simcha through experiencing mitzvot, connecting to mitzvot. It's interesting, most places in the Torah when it refers to simcha, it refers to things that you do with other people. Like sameach chatan v'kala. Think of the bracha we say to a chatan v'kala. Sameach tesamach re'im ahuvim ki samechacha yitzircha began eden mikedem. The great simcha that a chatan and a kala have should be the simcha of friends, like the simcha that Hashem had back in Gan Eden when He created us. We all want to live impassioned Jewish lives. I don't think there's anyone in this room, anyone listening online, who wakes up in the morning and says, I just want to go through the motions. I just want to make it through another week. That's not what we want. We want to be passionate, connected to our mitzvahs, connected to the Torah, connected to our families, connected to everything that we do. But how do we do it? How do we start? How do we start an impassioned Jewish life? What's the secret? And I would suggest that we find ways to put simcha into our life. Find ways to connect to Torah and mitzvot with simcha, with happiness. And through this, we will feel a great connection to each other, to the Torah, to our families. And this will ultimately bring the Gula. This will ultimately bring the redemption. B'ezrat Hashem, like I said from the beginning, this should be the last Tisha B'Av. Because B'ezrat Hashem, we will feel that connection. We will feel that simcha. Infuse our lives with true joy, with true simcha. And when the Orcha Sadikim says that we're 1,000 times more reward for doing a mitzvah with simcha, we know that we're not supposed to do mitzvahs for reward. What does he mean? 1,000 times more connection. And think about in our relationships. If you do something for your spouse, if you do something for a stranger, if you do something for your child, and you do it, like the pasuk says, bikeri, with rot. Okay, I happen to be here, so I have something for you. Imagine you tell your spouse, I was walking down the street, I happened to see something, maybe you liked it, so I got it, here it is. Versus saying, I thought about you, I'm connected, I care. If we have that mindset, a mindset of care, of connection, we are so much more connected. And through that, it creates a spiral effect of connection, bringing more connection. And I suggest that Shabbat might be the place. The very fact that Tisha B'Av was nidche by Shabbat is a message to us that we should tap into the power of Shabbat and use that power of Shabbat to be nidche, to overcome all the sadness, all the disconnection, all the mourning that has befallen the Jewish people and befalls us sometimes. Thank you.